The altimeter read 12,000 feet when Maria Santos realized she had exactly 47 seconds to save 200 lives. Through the windscreen of the aging C-130 Hercules, she could see the hurricane's eye wall approaching like a massive gray fist ready to crush everything in its path. Below her, on the tiny Caribbean island of San Miguel, 200 civilians huddled in a school gymnasium, praying someone would come for them before the storm surge arrived. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The radio crackled with urgent voices from Falcon Ridge Air Force Base. Transport 7, you need to abort immediately. Weather conditions are deteriorating beyond safe parameters. Return to base. Maria's hand hovered over the radio switch. 6 months ago, she would have followed that order without question. 6 months ago, she was just another face in the operations planning center, plotting flight paths and calculating fuel loads, while the real pilots flew the real missions. 6 months ago, everyone called her a desk jockey, and maybe they were. Right, but 47 seconds can change everything. The Nevada sun blazed mercilessly across the tarmac at Falcon Ridge Air Force Base as Maria Santos stepped out of the government sedan that had brought her from the airport. Her duffel bag felt heavier than it should have, weighed down not just by her belongings, but by the uncertainty of starting over at 32. Around her, the desert air shimmered with heat waves rising from the concrete, and the distant mountains looked like jagged teeth against the harsh blue sky. Falcon Ridge was everything she had imagined and nothing like she had hoped. The base sprawled across the high desert like a small city, with gleaming hangars housing the most advanced aircraft in the world. F-16 fighting Falcons sat on the flight, lying like sleeping predators, their sleek forms promising speed and power that made Maria's heart race with possibility. This was where dreams of flight came to be tested, where the best pilots in the Air Force earned their wings on the most challenging aircraft ever built. Maria had dreamed of this moment for 15 years, ever since she had first enlisted and then assigned to air traffic control instead of pilot training. Back then, the recruiter had been honest about her chances. You're smart, Santos, and your test scores are solid, but pilot slots are competitive. Air traffic control is a great career, and who knows, maybe you can cross-train later. Later had stretched into a decade and a half of watching other people fly while she guided them safely through the skies from the ground. The cross-training opportunity had finally come, but Maria knew she was fighting an uphill battle. At 32, she was significantly older than the typical pilot candidate. Most of the people in her class would be fresh-faced 22-year-olds, straight from the academy or ROTC programs, with perfect vision, lightning reflexes, and no fear. Maria had experience, determination, and a deep understanding of aviation systems that came from years of coordinating complex flight operations, but she wondered if that would be enough. The Thunder Valley Flight Training Complex loomed ahead of her as she walked across the base, following the directions she had memorized from the map. The building was a monument to aviation excellence, with glass walls that reflected the desert sun and displayed the aircraft inside like trophies. Through those windows, she could see T-38 Talon trainers, the sleek white jets that would either make or break her dreams over the next 6 months. Other candidates were already arriving, and Maria couldn't help but notice how young they looked. They moved with the confidence of people who had never been told they couldn't do something. Their flight suits crisp and new, their aviator sunglasses reflecting the desert landscape. Many of them were clearly friends from their previous assignments or schools, greeting each other with the easy camaraderie of people who belonged to the same exclusive club. Maria felt like an intruder at a party where everyone else knew the secret handshake. "You look lost," a voice said behind her. Maria turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man with perfectly styled hair and a smile that seemed calculated to charm. His name tag read Harrison, and his flight suit looked like it had been tailored specifically for him. "Jake Harrison," he said, extending a hand. "Let me guess, you're here for the admin briefing? The personnel office is in the building behind us." The assumption stung, but Maria had learned long ago that correcting people's misconceptions was often more trouble than it was worth. "Actually, I'm here for pilot training," she said, keeping her voice level. "Maria Santos." Jake's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "No kidding? Well, welcome to the program. Where are you coming from?" 15 years in air traffic control, most recently at Andrews. "Air traffic control," Jake repeated, and Maria could hear the gears turning in his head. "So you've been watching us fly from the ground. That's got to give you a different perspective." There was something in his tone that made Maria's jaw tighten slightly. It wasn't quite condescending, but it wasn't entirely respectful either. "It does," she said simply. "I've had a lot of time to observe what works and what doesn't." "I'm sure you have," Jake said. "Well, hopefully the transition from watching to doing won't be too difficult for you. Flying's a young person's game, but I'm sure you'll figure something out." Before Maria could respond, Jake was already walking away, joining a group of other candidates who greeted him like a returning hero. Maria watched them for a moment, noting the easy way they interacted, the shared references, and inside jokes that marked them as members of the same tribe. She had seen this dynamic before in air traffic control, the way the community could be welcoming to those who fit the mold and subtly exclusive to those who didn't. The briefing room was filled with the nervous energy of people about to embark on something that would either fulfill their greatest dreams or crush them entirely. Maria found a seat toward the back, where she could observe without drawing attention to herself. The room buzzed with conversation as candidates compared their backgrounds, their previous assignments, and their expectations for the program. "I can't believe we're finally here," she heard one young woman say to her neighbor. "I've been dreaming about this since I was 12 years old." "Same here," the neighbor replied. "My dad flew F-15s, and my grandfather flew Mustangs in World War II. It's like the family business." Maria listened to similar conversations all around her. Legacy pilots following in famous footsteps, academy graduates who had been groomed for aviation excellence since their teenage years, and young officers whose entire military careers had been building toward this moment. She tried to remember what it felt like to be that confident, that certain that you belonged somewhere. Captain Derek Mitchell entered the room with the bearing of someone who had spent his entire adult life in cockpits. His flight suit was faded and worn in all the right places, marked with patches from squadrons and deployments that spoke of real experience in real aircraft. When he spoke, the room fell silent immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Falcon Ridge Air Force Base and the Thunder Valley Flight Training Complex. Over the next 6 months, you will either earn your wings as Air Force pilots, or you will find yourself on a bus back to whatever career field is willing to take you. The statistics are not encouraging. Historically, 30% of candidates who begin this program will not finish it. Some will be eliminated for academic reasons, some for flying deficiencies, and some will eliminate themselves when they realize that flying high-performance aircraft is not the romantic adventure they imagined." Maria felt the weight of those words settle over the room like a heavy blanket. She had known the statistics, of course, but hearing them spoken aloud by someone who would help decide her fate made them feel more real and more threatening. "This program is designed to be the most challenging aviation training in the world," Captain Mitchell continued. "We will push you to your physical, mental, and emotional limits. We will ask you to master complex aircraft systems, navigate in 3 dimensions at high speed, and make life or death decisions in milliseconds. Some of you will discover that you have what it takes to be military aviators. Others will discover that you do not." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. The good news is that if you do succeed here, you will join an elite fraternity of men and women who have earned the right to call themselves Air Force pilots. You will fly aircraft that represent the pinnacle of human engineering achievement. You will serve your country in ways that matter. The bad news is that the path to get there will be the most difficult thing you have ever attempted. Maria found herself studying Captain Mitchell's face, trying to read what he might be thinking. As he looked at each candidate, when his eyes met hers, she thought she saw something that might have been skepticism, but it passed so quickly she couldn't be sure. Your training will begin with academics, Mitchell said. You will learn aerodynamics, aircraft systems, navigation, meteorology, and federal aviation regulations. You will study until your eyes bleed and your head pounds, and then you will study some more. Knowledge is the foundation of everything we do here. If you cannot master the theoretical aspects of aviation, you will never be trusted with an aircraft. That costs more than most people's houses. Around the room, candidates were taking notes, but Maria found herself listening more than writing. She had been studying aviation theory for years, reading technical manuals and regulations in her spare time, preparing for this opportunity that she had never been certain would come. The academic portion might actually be her strength, she realized. While the younger candidates would be learning systems and procedures for the first time, she would be building on a foundation of knowledge that came from years of practical application. After academics, you will begin flight training in the T-38 Talon, Mitchell continued. The T-38 is a supersonic jet trainer that will teach you everything you need to know about flying high-performance aircraft. It is also unforgiving of mistakes, impatient with hesitation, and entirely capable of killing you if you treat it with anything less than complete respect. Maria had seen T-38s before, of course, but only from the ground. They were beautiful aircraft, sleek and purposeful, with twin engines that could push them through the sound barrier and beyond. The thought of actually flying one made her heart race with a mixture of excitement and terror. Flight training is where most eliminations occur, Mitchell said, and his tone suggested that he had delivered this news many times before to many groups of hopeful candidates. Flying a supersonic jet is not like driving a car or even flying a civilian aircraft. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Everything happens faster. The consequences of mistakes are more severe, and the margin for error is essentially zero. You will be evaluated on your ability to master complex procedures, make decisions under pressure, and demonstrate the judgment necessary to operate safely in high-performance aircraft. As Mitchell spoke, Maria noticed Jake Harrison leaning back in his chair with a slight smile, as if the warnings were meant for other people. She wondered if that confidence was based on experience or simply on the kind of self-assurance that came from never having been seriously challenged. In her experience, the people who were most confident at the beginning of difficult processes were often the ones who struggled most when they encountered real obstacles. The final phase of your training will be in the aircraft you will actually fly operationally, Mitchell said. For some of you, that will mean fighters. For others, it will mean transports, tankers, or special operations aircraft. Each track has its own challenges and its own rewards. But first, you have to earn the right to make that choice by proving you belong here. When the briefing ended, the candidates filed out in small groups, already beginning to form the social hierarchies that would define their experience over the next 6 months. Maria hung back, watching the dynamics unfold. Jake Harrison was clearly the center of one group, surrounded by candidates who seemed eager to associate themselves with his confidence and charisma. Other groups formed around shared backgrounds, similar ages, or common interests. Maria found herself walking alone toward the dormitory, where she would be living for the duration of the program. The building was functional rather than comfortable. designed to house young officers who were expected to spend most of their time studying or training rather than relaxing in their rooms. Her room was small and Spartan, with a single bed, a desk, and a closet barely large enough for her uniforms and civilian clothes. As she unpacked her belongings, Maria could hear conversations in the hallway outside her door. The other candidates were getting to know each other, sharing stories from their previous assignments, and speculating about what the training would be like. She was tempted to join them, but something held her back. Maybe it was the awareness that she was different from most of them, or maybe it was the habit of independence that came from years of being the only woman in many of her work environments. Instead, she pulled out a notebook and began reviewing the material she had brought with her. Flight manuals, regulation guides, and technical specifications filled the pages with the kind of detailed information that she had been absorbing for years. While the other candidates were socializing, she would be studying. While they were building relationships, she would be building knowledge. It might not make her popular, but it might give her the edge she needed to succeed. The first few days of academics confirmed Maria's suspicions about her strengths and weaknesses in the program. The classroom material came easily to her, years of practical experience making the theoretical concepts feel familiar rather than foreign. While other candidates struggled with the complexities of jet engine operation or the intricacies of navigation systems, Maria found herself understanding not just the what but the why behind the procedures they were learning. Her instructors noticed, though their reactions were mixed. Some seemed pleased to have a student who grasped the material quickly and could answer complex questions without hesitation. Others seemed almost suspicious, as if her knowledge came too easily to be entirely legitimate. During one particularly challenging lesson on weather systems and their effects on flight operations, the instructor called on Maria to explain the relationship between atmospheric pressure and aircraft performance. Her answer was thorough, detailed, and demonstrated an understanding that went well beyond what most candidates possessed at this stage of their training. When she finished, the instructor nodded approvingly, but she could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, measuring and evaluating. Jake Harrison, in particular, seemed to be studying her with new interest. "Looks like we have a ringer in the class," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. 15 years of watching from the control tower really pays off. The comment drew a few chuckles from the other candidates, but Maria could hear the edge underneath the humor. She was being marked as different, as someone whose success came from an unfair advantage rather than natural ability. It was a dynamic she recognized from her years in air traffic control, where knowledge and experience were sometimes viewed with suspicion by those who preferred to rely on instinct and natural talent. The academic phase continued for weeks, each day bringing new challenges and new opportunities for Maria to demonstrate her understanding of aviation systems and procedures. She consistently scored at the top of the class on written examinations, her years of study and practical experience giving her a foundation that the younger candidates simply couldn't match. But she also began to notice that academic success was not necessarily respected by everyone in the program. "Bookworm," she heard someone whisper as she left a particularly successful examination. "All theory, no stick and rudder skills." The comment stung because Maria wondered if it might be true. She could memorize flight manuals and regulations, calculate fuel loads and navigation waypoints, and explain complex atmospheric phenomena with mathematical precision. But she had never actually flown a supersonic jet, never felt the G-forces that came with high-performance maneuvering, never had to make split-second decisions while traveling at hundreds of miles per hour, thousands of feet above the ground. The transition from classroom to cockpit would be the real test, and Maria knew that her academic success might mean nothing if she couldn't translate knowledge into practical flying skills. As the weeks passed and flight training approached, she found herself both eager and terrified to discover whether 15 years of watching from the ground had actually prepared her to take to the sky. The night before their first flight, Maria sat in her room reviewing emergency procedures and trying to calm the nervous energy that had been building for weeks. Tomorrow she would finally find out if her dreams of flight were realistic or simply the fantasies of someone who had spent too many years watching other people do what she had always wanted to do herself. Outside her window, she could see the T-38s sitting on the flight line, their white forms ghostly in the desert moonlight. Tomorrow she would climb into one of those cockpits and either begin the journey toward earning her wings or discover that some dreams were meant to remain forever out of reach. The desk jockey was about to become a pilot or fail trying. The T-38 Talon cockpit was smaller than Maria had imagined, barely wider than her shoulders and filled with switches, dials, and displays that seemed to pulse with the promise of speed and danger. Major Lisa Thompson, her instructor pilot, was strapped into the rear seat, her voice crackling through the intercom with the patient authority of someone who had guided hundreds of nervous students through their first encounters with supersonic flight. "All right, Santos, this is your moment of truth," Thompson said as Maria ran through the pre-flight checklist with methodical precision. "Everything you've learned in the classroom gets tested up here. The aircraft doesn't care about your test scores or how well you understand aerodynamics in theory. It only cares about what you do with the stick and rudder." Maria's hands moved across the instrument panel with deliberate care, checking each system and verifying that the aircraft was ready for flight. Around her on the flight line, other student-instructor pairs were going through similar preparations, but she forced herself to focus only on her own aircraft and her own responsibilities. The morning desert air was crisp and clear, perfect. Flying weather that offered no excuses for poor performance. "Remember, we're going to start simple today," Thompson continued. "Basic aircraft handling, some gentle maneuvering, and a few practice approaches. Nothing dramatic. The T-38 has a reputation for being unforgiving, but it's also one of the finest training aircraft ever built. Treat it with respect, and it will teach you everything you need to know about flying jets." As they taxied toward the runway, Maria could see other T-38s ahead of them in the queue, their twin engines creating shimmering heat waves against the desert landscape. Each aircraft represented someone else's dreams and aspirations, other candidates who were facing the same moment of truth that would either validate years of preparation or expose the gap between imagination and reality. Jake Harrison was in the aircraft directly ahead of them, and Maria could see him through the canopy, his movements confident and relaxed as he communicated with his instructor. Even from a distance, he projected the kind of easy assurance that suggested he belonged in the cockpit of a supersonic jet. Maria wondered if she looked half as comfortable, or if her nervousness was obvious to anyone watching. "Tower, Falcon. 03, ready for takeoff," Thompson said into the radio, and Maria felt her heart rate increase as the moment of actually leaving the ground approached. "Falcon 03, cleared for takeoff runway 27, contact departure on 124.75. Thompson's voice came through the intercom again. "Your aircraft, Santos. Show me what 15 years of watching has taught you." Maria advanced the throttles, feeling the twin engines spool up behind her with a sound that was part whistle, part roar, and entirely exhilarating. The T-38 began to roll down the runway, slowly at first, then with increasing speed as the engines reached full power. At 60 knots, the aircraft felt alive beneath her hands. At 80 knots, the controls became responsive to her inputs. At 100 knots, the nose wheel lifted off the ground, and suddenly they were flying. The sensation was unlike anything Maria had ever experienced. The ground fell away beneath them with startling speed, the runway shrinking to a thin line, and then disappearing entirely as they climbed into the clear Nevada sky. Through the canopy, she could see the base spread out below them like a detailed model, the hangars and buildings arranged in neat geometric patterns against the desert floor. "Nice takeoff," Thompson said, and Maria could hear the approval in her voice. "Now let's see how you handle some basic maneuvering. Turn left heading 270 and climb to 8,000 feet." The T-38 responded to Maria's control inputs with a precision that was both thrilling and slightly terrifying. Unlike the civilian aircraft she had experienced during her private pilot training years earlier, every movement translated immediately into aircraft response. There was no lag, no mushiness in the controls, just direct and immediate feedback that demanded equal precision from the pilot. As they climbed through 5,000 feet, Maria began to understand why the T-38 had such a reputation among pilots. The aircraft was honest in a way that was both refreshing and challenging. It would do exactly what she told it to do, no more and no less, which meant that every input had to be deliberate and correct. There was no margin for casual or imprecise flying. "Let's try some gentle turns," Thompson said. "Nothing dramatic, just 30 degrees of bank to the left. Hold it for 10 seconds, then reverse to 30 degrees right." Maria rolled the aircraft into the turn, feeling the G-forces press her into her seat as the horizon tilted around them. The sensation was intoxicating, a physical reminder that they were no longer bound by the limitations of ground-based existence. At the same time, she could feel the aircraft's desire to continue turning, to tighten the radius and increase the bank angle, and she had to consciously resist the temptation to let the T-38 show her what it could really do. "Good control inputs," Thompson observed. "You're not over-controlling, which is the most common mistake new students make. The T-38 will amplify any tendency to make large, abrupt control movements. Small inputs, smooth corrections." They spent the next hour working through basic maneuvers, each one designed to teach Maria something fundamental about controlling a high-performance aircraft in three-dimensional space. Climbs, descents, turns, and straight and level flight all required a level of precision that was far beyond what she had experienced in civilian aircraft. The T-38 demanded constant attention, constant small corrections, and constant awareness of airspeed, altitude, and attitude. "Let's head back to the pattern and practice some approaches," Thompson said as they turned back toward Falcon Ridge. "Remember, the T-38 approaches fast and lands fast. You'll be crossing the threshold at about 150 knots, which is probably 50 knots faster than anything you've landed before." The approach to runway 27 required Maria to manage airspeed, altitude, and aircraft configuration simultaneously while dealing with radio communications and watching for other traffic in the pattern. The workload was intense, far more demanding than anything Maria had faced during her civilian flying experience. She felt like she was struggling to keep up with the T-38. "Reduce power a bit," Thompson instructed. "You're getting too fast." Controlling airspeed is crucial in the T-38. Too fast, and you'll float down the runway forever. Too slow, and you risk stalling close to the ground. Maria adjusted the throttle, watching the airspeed slowly return to the target for landing. The runway rapidly expanded in her windscreen. The touchdown markers seemed to rush toward her. Everything was happening faster than she was ready for. "Flare now," Thompson said. Maria gently pulled back on the stick, and the descent rate eased just as the main gear touched down with a soft bump. They were back on the ground. The flight was over. She realized she'd been holding her breath through the final moments of the approach. "Not bad for your first flight," Thompson commented as they taxied to the parking area. "You've got solid control, and you stay calm under pressure, both essential traits for a jet pilot." As they shut down and climbed out, Maria noticed Jake Harrison already on the ground, surrounded by enthusiastic classmates eager to hear about his first flight. His instructor stood nearby, nodding as Jake recounted details of the flight. Maria overheard snippets of high praise. "Outstanding. Natural feel for the aircraft," Jake's instructor said. "Some people are just born to fly jets." Maria felt a familiar wave of doubt. Her own flight had gone fine. Thompson's feedback had been professional and encouraging, but it lacked the glowing enthusiasm Jake had received. Had she simply been average? Her academic success suddenly felt flimsy compared to the demands of actually flying. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Maria approached each flight with thorough preparation, memorizing maneuvers and emergency procedures, relying on her academic strengths. Her flights were generally safe and technically sound but not spectacular. Meanwhile, Jake seemed to thrive effortlessly in the cockpit. His flying was smooth, his radio calls confident, and he handled multitasking like it was second nature. Instructors were openly impressed. After watching one of Jake's aerobatic flights, Maria overheard a comment that stung. "Some people just have it. You can teach anyone to fly safely, but you can't teach instinct." Maria was making steady progress, but she began to feel the gap between proficiency and excellence, the difference between following a checklist correctly and possessing an innate feel for the aircraft. In week 4, formation flying began, one of the most challenging parts of military aviation. Flying close to another aircraft demanded flawless precision and unshakable focus. For her first formation flight, Maria was assigned as wingman to Jake, who was leading the flight, a pairing meant to give Jake leadership practice and Maria a chance to learn alongside a top student. Jake delivered a clear, confident briefing. "Smooth, steady controls are the key," he said. "Any sudden moves become dangerous when we're this close together. We'll start wide and work our way in tighter." The flight started well. Both jets took off and linked up over the training area. Jake's flying was predictable, making it easier for Maria to hold position as they practiced various maneuvers. She found herself reluctantly respecting his skill, even though his easy confidence still annoyed her. "Looking good, Santos," Jake called over the radio. "Let's tighten it up a bit." Maria carefully edged her aircraft closer, shrinking the gap from 20 feet to 10. Flying this close required total trust, a mix of exhilaration and fear. It meant both pilots had to be absolutely precise. Then, everything unraveled in seconds. Jake's jet hit unexpected turbulence, jolting it downward and right straight toward Maria's plane. At the same time, she hit the same turbulent air, her jet bouncing upward into Jake's path. For a terrifying instant, the two aircraft were converging with alarming speed. A collision seemed inevitable. But Maria reacted instantly. Rather than yank her aircraft away, potentially worsening the situation, she pushed the stick forward and added power, diving under Jake's jet and creating just enough space to avoid impact while staying in control. The maneuver took perfect timing and fine control, but it worked. Within seconds, both planes had stabilized, safely back in formation. "Good recovery," Jake said over the radio, and Maria could hear something in his voice that might have been surprise. That was some quick thinking. But when they landed and debriefed the flight, Maria noticed that Jake's version of events emphasized his own quick reactions and leadership in managing the emergency. The way he told it, his immediate radio call to increase separation, had prevented a dangerous situation from becoming catastrophic, with Maria simply following his instructions to maintain safe spacing. Maria listened to the debrief without comment, but she found herself wondering if this was how her contributions would always be remembered. Her quick thinking and precise control inputs had actually prevented the collision, but Jake's narrative made it sound like he had been the one who solved the problem while she had simply followed directions. Major Thompson pulled Maria aside after the debrief. "I want to talk to you about that formation flight," she said, and Maria braced herself for criticism about her positioning or her reaction to the turbulence. "You handled that emergency exactly right," Thompson continued. "Your control inputs were precise and immediate, and you demonstrated the kind of judgment that we want to see from our pilots. That was potentially a very dangerous situation, and you resolved it with textbook technique. The praise felt good, but Maria noticed that it was delivered privately rather than in front of the other students and instructors. Her competent performance was acknowledged by those who knew enough to recognize it, but it didn't seem to contribute to her reputation within the broader training program. As the weeks passed, the gap between perception and reality became more apparent. Jake continued to be regarded as the star of the class, the natural pilot whose instincts and abilities set the standard for everyone else. His flights were consistently smooth and impressive, his radio work was professional, and his interactions with instructors suggested mutual respect and admiration. Maria's performance was solid and reliable, but it didn't generate the same level of excitement or discussion. Her flights were safe and competent, her procedures were correct, and her academic performance remained at the top of the class. But there was something about her approach that seemed to mark her as a technician rather than an aviator, someone who could execute procedures correctly, but might lack the indefinable qualities that separated good pilots from great ones. Distinction became more significant as the class approached the midpoint evaluation, a comprehensive assessment that would determine which students continued in the program and which were eliminated for various deficiencies. The evaluation included both flying performance and academic achievement, but Maria had begun to suspect that there were other factors involved as well, less tangible measures of potential and aptitude that might weigh heavily in the final decision. During one particularly challenging flight, Maria found herself paired with Captain Derek Mitchell himself for an evaluation of her aerobatic skills and emergency procedures. Mitchell was known for pushing students to their limits, testing not just their technical abilities, but their judgment and composure under pressure. "Today we're going to see what you're really made of, Santos," Mitchell said as they strapped into the T-38. "I want to see how you handle some challenging scenarios, and how you react when things don't go according to plan." The flight began with a series of aerobatic maneuvers designed to test Maria's ability to control the aircraft in unusual attitudes and high-G environments. Loops, rolls, and spins required her to maintain spatial orientation while managing significant physical stress, and she could feel the limits of her experience being tested with each new maneuver. "Pull harder," Mitchell commanded during a loop, and Maria increased back pressure on the stick, feeling the G-forces build as they climbed vertically toward the inverted position at the top of the maneuver. Her vision began to gray at the edges as the blood drained from her head, but she maintained control of the aircraft and completed the loop with precision. "Good G tolerance," Mitchell observed. "Now let's see how you handle some emergency procedures." Without warning, Mitchell pulled one of the throttles to idle and declared an engine failure, a scenario that required immediate recognition of the problem and execution of emergency procedures while maintaining control of the aircraft. Maria's response was textbook perfect, her hands moving to the correct switches and controls while her voice remained calm and professional as she declared the emergency and began the appropriate checklists. "Engine failure procedures complete," she reported after running through the required actions. "Aircraft is stable and under control, requesting vectors to the nearest suitable airport." "Outstanding," Mitchell said, and Maria could hear genuine approval in his voice. "Your emergency procedures were flawless, and you maintained excellent aircraft control throughout the scenario. That's exactly the kind of performance we want to see from our pilots." But when they landed and completed the post-flight debrief, Maria noticed that Mitchell's written comments were more measured than his verbal praise had suggested. Her performance was rated as satisfactory rather than exceptional, competent rather than outstanding. The gap between what she had accomplished and how it was recorded felt significant, though she couldn't quite articulate why. The midpoint evaluation results were posted on a Friday afternoon, and Maria found herself standing in front of the bulletin board with the rest of her class, reading the names of those who would continue in the program and those who would be reassigned to other career fields. Her name was on the continuation list, but it was accompanied by comments that made her heart sink. Demonstrates solid technical skills and thorough understanding of procedures. The evaluation read, performance is consistently safe and competent, though lacking the natural instincts and adaptability that characterize exceptional aviators. Recommend continuation with close monitoring of progress in advanced phases of training. Jake Harrison's evaluation, by contrast, praised his exceptional natural flying ability and outstanding potential for high-performance aircraft. Several other students received similar accolades, their evaluations highlighting qualities like natural feel for the aircraft and instinctive understanding of flight dynamics. Maria stared at her evaluation for a long moment, trying to understand what it really meant. She was continuing in the program, which was the most important thing, but the language suggested that she was being retained more out of fairness than enthusiasm. Her technical competence was acknowledged, but there seemed to be doubt about whether she possessed the less tangible qualities that would make her successful in operational flying. That evening, as she sat in her room reviewing the day's flight, lessons and preparing for the next week's training, Maria tried to process what she had learned about herself and about the program. She was a competent pilot who could execute procedures correctly and handle emergencies appropriately, but apparently that wasn't enough to be considered exceptional. There was something else, some combination of natural instinct and intuitive understanding that she either lacked or hadn't yet learned to demonstrate. The question that haunted her as she fell asleep was whether those qualities could be developed through hard work and determination, or whether they were simply gifts that some people possessed and others didn't. Her dream of becoming an Air Force pilot was still alive, but the path forward seemed more uncertain than ever. The Operations Planning Center at Falcon Ridge buzzed with the constant activity of coordinating flight operations across 3 time zones. Banks of computers displayed real-time weather data, aircraft positions, and fuel calculations while duty officers monitored radio frequencies and tracked the movement of dozens of aircraft scattered across the western United States. It was here, 6 weeks after her midpoint evaluation, that Maria found herself assigned to what Captain Mitchell diplomatically called expanded learning opportunities. The reassignment had come without warning during what was supposed to be a routine check ride. Maria had performed the required maneuvers competently, her radio work had been professional, and her emergency procedures had been executed flawlessly. But something in her performance had apparently convinced her evaluators that she needed additional perspective on Air Force aviation before continuing with advanced flight training. Santos, you're going to spend the next month working with our mission planning specialists, Mitchell had explained after the flight. You'll learn how complex air operations are coordinated, how mission requirements are translated into specific flight plans, and how pilots integrate with the broader aviation enterprise. Consider it an opportunity to understand the bigger picture. The words had been carefully chosen to sound like an opportunity rather than a setback, but Maria understood the real message. She was being removed from the flying schedule while the program evaluated whether she had the potential to succeed in advanced training. Other students would continue progressing through the syllabus while she spent her days in front of computer screens, planning missions she wouldn't be flying. Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Thompson ran the Operations Planning Center with the efficiency of someone who had been coordinating complex aviation missions for over 20 years. Her desk was covered with flight plans, weather reports, and communication logs, and she moved between computer terminals with the quick, purposeful steps of someone who was always fighting against time. "So you're the pilot candidate they want us to educate," Thompson said when Maria reported for her new assignment. "Captain Mitchell says you're technically solid but need to develop a better understanding of how individual flights fit into larger operational requirements." Maria nodded, though she suspected that Mitchell's actual assessment had been less diplomatically phrased. "I'm here to learn whatever you think I need to know." "Good attitude," Thompson replied, gesturing toward a workstation equipped with multiple monitors and communication equipment. Aviation isn't just about individual pilot skills. Every flight is part of a larger system, and understanding that system is essential for anyone who wants to be an effective military aviator. The work was more complex and intellectually demanding than Maria had expected. Each mission required coordinating aircraft performance capabilities with weather conditions, fuel requirements, airspace restrictions, and operational objectives. A simple cross-country flight might involve planning alternate routes around thunderstorms, calculating fuel loads for different scenarios, and coordinating with air traffic control facilities across multiple states. "Look at this," Thompson said, pulling up a computer display showing a training mission planned for the following day. 4 T-38s flying from here to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, then back home. Sounds simple, right? Maria studied the display, noting the planned route, altitudes, and timing. It seems straightforward. "That's what most pilots think," Thompson said. "But watch what happens when we factor in real-world complexity." She began entering additional variables into the mission planning system. Weather reports showed thunderstorms developing along the planned route. Military operating areas would be active during their transit times, requiring coordination with other training flights. Fuel availability at Nellis was limited due to maintenance. On storage facilities, one of the planned pilots had called in sick, requiring a last-minute substitution. "Now we need to reroute around the weather, which increases fuel requirements," Thompson explained as she worked through the problem. "The new route takes them through different controlled airspace, so we need updated clearances. The substitute pilot isn't qualified in the same aircraft variant, so we need to switch aircraft assignments. And we need to ensure that the revised timing doesn't conflict with other scheduled activities." Maria watched Thompson work through the cascade of changes and modifications, each solution creating new problems that required additional adjustments. What had started as a simple 4-ship training flight was becoming a complex exercise in logistics and coordination. "This is what mission planning really looks like," Thompson said. "Pilots see the final flight plan and assume someone just drew a line on a map and calculated some fuel numbers. They don't understand the dozens of variables and contingencies that go into every mission." Over the following weeks, Maria immersed herself in the intricacies of mission planning and air operations coordination. She learned to use sophisticated computer programs that could model aircraft performance under different conditions, analyze weather patterns and their effects on flight operations, and coordinate with air traffic control agencies to ensure safe and efficient use of national airspace. The work was fascinating and intellectually challenging, but it also felt like a step away from her goal of becoming a pilot rather than toward it. While she was learning valuable skills and gaining insights into the complexity of military aviation, her classmates were progressing through advanced flight training, accumulating experience in more challenging aircraft and more complex flying scenarios. Jake Harrison, in particular, seemed to be excelling in the advanced phases of training. Maria occasionally heard updates about his progress from other students who passed through the Operations Planning Center, and the reports were consistently positive. His natural flying abilities were being recognized by senior instructors, and there was already speculation about which high-performance aircraft he might be assigned to fly after graduation. "Harrison's got that special something," she heard one instructor comment to another during a planning meeting. "Give him an F-16 and he'll be an ace within 6 months." The casual confidence in Jake's future success contrasted sharply with the uncertainty surrounding Maria's own prospects. Her assignment to the Operations Planning Center was officially temporary, but no one had given her a definitive timeline for returning to flight training. The longer she spent away from the cockpit, the more her flying skills would deteriorate, and the more difficult it would become to rejoin her class. The breakthrough came during her 3rd week in the Operations Planning Center, when a complex Search and rescue exercise exposed serious flaws in the way training missions were being planned and executed. The exercise involved multiple aircraft types operating in challenging weather conditions, with mission requirements that changed dynamically as the scenario evolved. Maria was assigned to monitor the exercise from the operations center, tracking aircraft positions and coordinating with various agencies as the simulated emergency unfolded. What she observed troubled her deeply. The mission planning for the exercise had been based on optimistic assumptions about weather conditions and aircraft performance that weren't holding up under real-world stress. "The weather is worse than forecast," she reported to Chief Thompson. As the exercise progressed, the helicopters are having trouble maintaining visual contact with the ground, and the fixed-wing aircraft are burning more fuel than planned due to turbulence and course deviations. Thompson frowned as she reviewed the incoming reports. How much more fuel? Maria pulled up the real-time fuel consumption data on her computer screen. 15% higher than planned, which means they'll have to return to base earlier than expected or find an alternate refueling location. What about the search pattern coverage? Compromised, Maria said, running quick calculations on her workstation. With the reduced loiter time and visibility limitations, they're only going to cover about 60% of the planned search area. Thompson studied the displays for a moment, then reached for her radio. "All stations, this is Operations Center. We need to revise the search plan based on current fuel and weather conditions." But the revision process was slow and cumbersome, requiring coordination between multiple agencies and approval from various levels of command. By the time new instructions were transmitted to the aircraft, precious time had been lost, and the effectiveness of the entire exercise was compromised. "This happens more often than it should," Thompson admitted to Maria after the exercise concluded. "We plan missions based on perfect conditions and optimal performance, then wonder why things don't work out as expected when reality intervenes." Maria had been thinking about the same problem, and she had some ideas about potential solutions. What if we built more flexibility into the initial planning? Instead of optimizing for single-point scenarios, we could develop decision trees that account for likely variations in weather, fuel consumption, and mission requirements. Thompson looked interested. "Explain what you mean." "Instead of planning one mission profile, we plan 3 or 4, depending on actual conditions encountered," Maria said, pulling up a clean computer screen and beginning to sketch out her concept. "Primary plan for optimal conditions, alternate plans for various degraded scenarios, and decision criteria for switching between them in real time." She worked through the example of the search and rescue exercise, showing how pre-planned alternatives could have allowed the mission commander to adapt quickly to changing conditions without requiring lengthy coordination and approval processes. The aircraft would carry more fuel initially to account for the possibility of extended operations, she explained. The search patterns would be designed with decision points where commanders could switch to different coverage strategies based on actual performance and weather conditions. And the coordination requirements would be simplified because all the alternatives would be pre-approved and understood by all participants. Thompson studied Maria's analysis with growing interest. "This is sophisticated thinking. Have you discussed these ideas with anyone else?" "Not really," Maria said. "I didn't think it was my place to critique how missions are planned." "It absolutely is your place," Thompson said firmly. "This is exactly the kind of insight we need from people who understand both the operational requirements and the technical complexities. I want you to develop this concept further and present it to the operations group commander." Over the next week, Maria threw herself into developing a comprehensive proposal for adaptive mission planning. She analyzed historical data from training exercises, identified common failure modes and inefficiencies, and developed mathematical models for optimizing mission flexibility under uncertain conditions. The work drew on everything she had learned: During her years in air traffic control, her recent flight training experience, and her weeks in the operations planning center. But it also required her to think creatively about problems that had been accepted as inevitable challenges rather than solvable puzzles. The presentation to Colonel Patricia Hayes, the operations group commander, was scheduled for a Thursday morning in the main briefing room. Maria had spent days preparing her slides and rehearsing her arguments, but she still felt nervous as she set up her materials and waited for the senior officers to arrive. Colonel Hayes entered the room with the bearing of someone who had been making difficult decisions about aviation operations for most of her career. She was accompanied by Captain Mitchell, Chief Thompson, and several other senior staff members whose expressions suggested they were skeptical about what a reassigned pilot candidate might have to contribute to operational planning. "Santos, Chief Thompson tells me you have some ideas about improving our mission planning processes," Colonel Hayes said as she took her seat at the conference table. "I'm interested to hear what you've discovered." Maria began her presentation with an analysis of recent training exercises, highlighting patterns of inefficiency and mission degradation that had become so routine they were barely noticed. Her slides showed fuel consumption overruns, weather-related delays, and coordination failures that collectively reduced the effectiveness of training operations by significant margins. "The fundamental problem," she explained, "is that we plan for success but don't adequately prepare for the variations and challenges that are statistically certain to occur. This creates a gap between planned performance and actual results that forces aircrews to improvise solutions during critical phases of missions." She clicked to her next slide, which showed a comparison between traditional linear planning and her proposed adaptive approach. "Instead of planning one optimal mission profile, we can plan multiple scenarios with predetermined decision criteria for switching between them based on real-time conditions." The room was quiet as Maria worked through her analysis, but she could see that she had the attention of everyone present. Colonel Hayes was taking notes, Captain Mitchell was studying the displays intently, and even the staff members who had initially seemed skeptical were leaning forward to examine her proposals more closely. "The mathematical modeling suggests that adaptive planning could improve mission effectiveness by 15 to 20% while reducing fuel consumption and crew workload," Maria continued. "The additional planning time required would be offset by reduced coordination requirements during mission execution." When she finished her presentation, the room remained silent for several seconds. Colonel Hayes was the first to speak. "This is impressive work, Santos. You've identified real problems and proposed practical solutions that could significantly improve our operations. How long did it take you to develop this analysis?" "About 10 days, ma'am, working evenings and weekends." 10 days, Hayes repeated. "Chief Thompson, how long would it normally take our operations research people to complete a similar study?" "Probably 6 months, ma'am, assuming they identified the problem in the first place." Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "Santos, I want you to work with our planning staff to implement a trial of your adaptive planning concept. Pick 3 upcoming exercises and develop full mission packages using your methodology. We'll compare the results with traditional planning approaches and see how well your predictions hold up under real-world conditions." The assignment was exactly the kind of opportunity Maria had been hoping for. A chance to demonstrate that her analytical skills and operational insights could contribute meaningfully to Air Force aviation. But it also meant extending her time away from flight training even further, and she was beginning to wonder if her path back to the cockpit was becoming less clear rather than more certain. Captain Mitchell approached her after the briefing ended. "That was an outstanding presentation, Santos. You demonstrated exactly the kind of systems thinking we want our pilots to develop. Thank you, sir. I hope the trial implementations will prove that the concepts are practical as well as theoretical." Mitchell studied her for a moment. "Can I ask you something? How do you feel about being away from flight training? The question caught Maria off guard. Honestly, sir, I'm concerned that I'm falling behind my classmates and that my flying skills are deteriorating while I'm not getting regular practice. That's a valid concern, Mitchell said, but I want you to consider something else. The insights you've developed here, the ability to see the bigger picture and identify systemic improvements, those are leadership qualities that we desperately need in our pilot force. Not everyone can do what you've just done. Maria felt a mixture of pride and frustration at Mitchell's comment. She appreciated the recognition of her analytical abilities, but she hadn't joined the Air Force to be a staff officer or an operations research analyst. She wanted to fly, and every day spent in meetings and computer modeling felt like another step away from that goal. The trial implementation of adaptive mission planning proved to be even more successful than Maria's initial analysis had predicted. The 3 exercises she had redesigned showed marked improvements in mission effectiveness, fuel efficiency, and crew satisfaction. Weather delays were minimized because alternate plans were already approved and ready to implement. Coordination requirements were reduced because decision criteria were established in advance. And overall mission success rates increased because aircrews were prepared for likely contingencies rather than forced to improvise solutions. Colonel Hayes was so impressed with the results that she ordered the adaptive planning methodology to be implemented across all training operations at Falcon Ridge. Maria found herself in the unusual position of being a pilot candidate who was briefing senior officers on operational improvements and writing technical reports that would influence Air Force training doctrine. But success in the Operations Planning Center also created new complications for her flight training prospects. The better she performed in her staff assignment, the more valuable she became to the operations group, and the less likely it seemed that she would be returned to pilot training. There were hints that she might be offered a permanent position in operations planning, with the possibility of completing her pilot training through a part-time program that would take years rather than months. The dilemma came to a head during a meeting with Colonel Hayes 6 weeks after her presentation. Santos, I want to discuss your future with the operations group. Your work here has been exceptional, and I believe you have the potential to make significant contributions to Air Force operations research and planning. Maria felt her heart sink as she realized where the conversation was heading. Ma'am, I appreciate the confidence you're showing in my abilities, but my goal is still to complete pilot training and fly operationally. I understand that, Hayes said, but I want you to consider the broader impact you could have. The improvements you've developed here will influence how the Air Force conducts training operations for years to come. That's the kind of career-defining contribution that most officers never have the opportunity to make. The offer was tempting in many ways. Maria had found the operations planning work intellectually satisfying, and she had clearly demonstrated an aptitude for analyzing complex systems and developing practical solutions. A career in operations research would provide job security, intellectual challenges, and the opportunity to influence Air Force doctrine at the highest levels. But it wasn't what she had dreamed of during those 15 years of watching other people fly while she coordinated their movements from the ground. The smell of jet fuel, the sensation of pulling G-forces in a high-performance aircraft, the challenge of mastering complex flying skills, these were the experiences that had motivated her to pursue pilot training in the first place. Ma'am, I'm honored by your offer, and I've learned a tremendous amount during my time here, Maria said carefully. But I'd like to request the opportunity to complete pilot training before making any long-term career decisions. Hayes studied her for a long moment. Santos, I'm going to be direct with you. Your flight training evaluations suggest that while you're a competent pilot, you may not have the natural instincts for high-performance aircraft that we look for in our operational aviators. Your strengths clearly lie in analysis, planning, and systems integration. The words hit like a physical blow, even though Maria had suspected that her flight training performance was being viewed as adequate rather than exceptional. "Ma'am, I believe I can improve with additional training and experience." "Perhaps," Hayes said. "But the question is whether that's the best use of your talents and the Air Force's training resources. I'm willing to support your request to return to flight training, but I want you to understand that operational flying assignments will depend on your performance in advanced training phases that are significantly more challenging than what you've experienced so far." Maria left the meeting with mixed emotions. She had been granted her request to return to flight training, but the conditions and expectations made it clear that she would be under intense scrutiny. Any performance issues or training difficulties would likely result in elimination from the program and reassignment to operations, planning, or some other non-flying career field. That evening, as she prepared to return to flight status after 2 months away from the cockpit, Maria reflected on everything she had learned during her time in the Operations Planning Center. The experience had given her insights into the complexity of military aviation that most pilots never developed, and it had demonstrated abilities and interests that she hadn't fully recognized in herself. But it had also reinforced her determination to succeed as a pilot. The work in operations planning had been satisfying intellectually, but it hadn't provided the visceral excitement and personal challenge that she craved. Flying was still her dream, and she was willing to accept whatever risks and challenges were necessary to pursue it. The next morning, she would return to the flight line, climb back into a T-38 cockpit, and resume the journey that had been interrupted but not abandoned. Whether that journey would lead to success or failure remained to be determined, but Maria was certain of one thing. She would rather fail as a pilot than succeed as anything else. The Hurricane Elena briefing room buzzed with urgent energy as meteorologists updated their projections every 30 minutes, each revision painting a more ominous picture of the storm's path and intensity. General Robert Chun had arrived at Falcon Ridge 2 days earlier for what was supposed to be a routine inspection of training operations. But nature had transformed his visit into a real-world test of the base's emergency response capabilities. Maria stood at the back of the briefing room, officially present as an operations planning specialist, but feeling distinctly out of place among the seasoned pilots and aircrew members who would actually execute whatever rescue mission emerged from the day's deliberations. Her return to flight training had been delayed by the hurricane emergency, and she found herself once again in the role of observer rather than participant. "The storm has intensified to Category 4 status," announced Major Jennifer Walsh, the base meteorologist, as she clicked through satellite images showing Elena's massive spiral structure. "Current track projections show landfall along the Texas Gulf Coast in approximately 18 hours, with storm surge heights potentially reaching 15 to 20 feet. General Chun leaned forward in his chair, studying the weather displays, with the focused attention of someone who understood the implications of what he was seeing. "What's the situation with civilian evacuations?" Colonel Hayes stepped to the podium, her expression grim. "Most coastal areas have been successfully evacuated, but we have a significant problem with San Miguel Island, approximately 40 miles offshore from Corpus Christi. It's a small research station and fishing community with about 200 residents who refused evacuation orders 48 hours ago." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. San Miguel Island was essentially a large sandbar with a small harbor, a research facility, and a cluster of buildings that housed a stubborn community of people who had weathered storms before. But Hurricane Elena was not a typical storm, and the island's low elevation made it particularly vulnerable to storm surge. "What's their current status?" General Chun asked. "They've lost most communications," Hayes replied. "Last contact was 6 hours ago when they reported that boats were no longer able to leave the harbor due to deteriorating sea conditions. The Coast Guard attempted a helicopter evacuation yesterday, but weather forced them to abort." "Current Weather conditions over the island? Major Walsh pulled up the latest meteorological data. Winds are already gusting to 60 knots with visibility dropping to less than 2 miles and heavy rain squalls. Conditions are going to deteriorate rapidly. Over the next 12 hours, General Chun studied the displays for several moments before speaking. What are our options for getting those people out? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several senior officers exchanged glances, and Maria could see the calculations happening in real time. 200 civilian lives balanced against the risks of flying rescue missions in deteriorating weather conditions that were already at the edge of safety margins. C-130 transport aircraft could potentially land on the island's airstrip if we move quickly, offered Lieutenant Colonel Rick Barnes, the Operations Group Deputy Commander. The runway is short but adequate for Hercules operations under normal conditions. Define normal conditions, General Chun said. Winds less than 30 knots, visibility greater than 3 miles, no significant crosswind component, Barnes replied. Current conditions are marginal, and they're getting worse. Major Walsh updated her weather display. The window for any air operations is closing rapidly. Within 6 hours, conditions will be beyond the capabilities of any aircraft we have available. Maria found herself studying the meteorological data with the analytical skills she had developed during her time in operations planning. The numbers told a clear story. Weather conditions over San Miguel Island were deteriorating in a predictable pattern, but that pattern also suggested brief periods where conditions might improve enough to permit flight operations. "Excuse me," she said, surprised to hear her own voice cutting through the senior officer's discussion. The room turned toward her, and she felt a moment of panic as she realized that everyone was waiting for her to justify her interruption. General Chun looked at her with curious interest. "You have something to add, Specialist?" "Ma'am, I've been analyzing the weather trends, and there appear to be periodic improvements in conditions that correspond to the outer bands of the hurricane circulation," Maria said, moving toward the meteorological displays. "If we time a mission to coincide with one of these breaks, we might have a 30 to 40-minute window where conditions are minimally acceptable for transport operations." Major Walsh frowned as she examined her own data. "The models don't show that kind of predictable pattern." "It's not in the standard forecasting models," Maria said, pulling up a different computer display. "But if you analyze the raw atmospheric pressure and wind speed data from weather buoys around the storm, there's a cyclical pattern that corresponds to the hurricane's spiral structure." She worked quickly through the data, highlighting the recurring intervals where conditions temporarily improved as gaps between the storm's rain bands passed over the island. The next break should occur in approximately 4 hours, lasting roughly 30 minutes. After that, the next opportunity wouldn't come for 8 hours, which would put it well after the island is completely overrun by storm surge. General Chun studied Maria's analysis with growing interest. "You're suggesting we have one shot at this rescue operation?" "Yes, sir, assuming my analysis is correct. A single aircraft, landing during the break in the weather, loading as many people as possible, and departing before conditions deteriorate again." The room erupted in discussion as senior officers debated the feasibility of Maria's proposal. The timing would have to be perfect, the execution flawless, and the aircraft would be operating at the absolute limits of its performance envelope. Any delay, any mechanical problem, any miscalculation could result in the loss of both the rescue aircraft and everyone it was trying to save. "It's risky," Lieutenant Colonel Barnes said. "If we miss the weather window or encounter unexpected conditions, we could lose a crew and an aircraft without saving anyone. If we don't try, 200 people are definitely going to die," General Chun replied. "What kind of crew would we need for a mission like this?" Colonel Hayes consulted her personnel roster. "Ideally, our most experienced transport pilots. with demonstrated expertise in challenging weather operations. The problem is that most of our senior crews are either deployed or participating in exercises at other bases. What about the available crews? We have several qualified C-130 pilots on base, but most of them are instructors or relatively junior aviators without extensive experience in extreme weather operations. General Chun looked around the room. I need someone who can make this work. Experience level is less important than judgment and the ability to adapt when conditions change. The discussion continued for another 20 minutes, with various officers proposing different crew combinations and mission profiles. But Maria noticed that the fundamental problem remained unchanged. The available pilots were either too inexperienced for such a dangerous mission, or lacked the specific skills needed for the challenging conditions they would face. General, if I may, Maria said during a brief pause in the discussion. Every head in the room turned toward her again, and she felt the weight of senior officers' attention focused on her words. Go ahead, General Chun said. I've been following the discussion about crew selection, and it seems like we're looking for a combination of technical flying skills and analytical capability to manage the weather timing and operational challenges. Maria said carefully, I believe I could contribute to this mission. The silence that followed was so complete that Maria could hear the air conditioning system cycling in the background. Several officers looked confused, as if they weren't sure they had heard her correctly. Jake Harrison, who had been quietly observing the briefing from a seat near the front, turned to look at her with undisguised amazement. Santos, you're not even a qualified pilot yet. This is a real mission with real consequences. I understand that, Maria said, feeling her face flush but pressing forward anyway. But I have more experience with complex weather analysis than most of the available pilots, and I've been working on adaptive mission planning scenarios that are directly relevant to this situation. Captain Mitchell, who had been silent throughout the briefing, suddenly spoke up. General Specialist. Santos has been working in our operations planning section for the past 2 months. Her analytical work has been exceptional, and she has a demonstrated ability to identify solutions to complex operational problems. But can she fly the mission? General Chun asked bluntly. Mitchell hesitated for a moment. Her flight training record shows solid basic skills and excellent procedural knowledge. She's been away from the cockpit for 8 weeks, but her fundamental abilities are sound. General Chun looked directly at Maria. Specialist, are you volunteering to co-pilot a rescue mission in Category 4 hurricane conditions? The question was stark and uncompromising, and Maria understood that her answer would either open the door to the most challenging flying of her life or mark the end of her credibility as a pilot candidate. Yes, sir, I am. Why? The simple question demanded a complete answer, and Maria took a moment to formulate her thoughts. Because I believe the combination of weather analysis and flight planning I've been developing gives us the best chance of success. And because 200 people shouldn't die because we were too cautious to try. General Chun studied her for a long moment, and Maria could see him weighing risks and possibilities in ways that went far beyond her individual qualifications. The decision he was considering would either validate her months of preparation and analysis or expose both her and the Air Force to catastrophic failure. Colonel Hayes, who would be the aircraft commander for this mission. Major Susan Torres is our most experienced C-130 pilot currently on base, Hayes replied. She has over 2,000 hours in transport aircraft and has flown humanitarian missions in challenging conditions. Get Major Torres in here immediately. I want to hear her assessment of this proposal. Major Torres arrived within minutes, still wearing the flight suit she had been wearing while preparing for a routine training mission that had been canceled due to the hurricane. She was a compact, serious woman whose bearing suggested extensive experience with difficult flying situations. General Chun quickly briefed her on the rescue mission proposal and Maria suggested weather timing. "Major, I need your professional assessment. Is this mission feasible with Specialist Santos as your co-pilot?" Torres studied the meteorological displays and Maria's weather analysis for several minutes before responding. "Sir, the weather timing analysis is sophisticated and appears sound. The mission would be at the edge of what's possible for C-130 operations, but it's technically feasible." "What about Specialist Santos as co-pilot?" "I've reviewed her training records," Torres said. "Her procedural knowledge is excellent, and her emergency response training is current. She's not qualified for complex weather operations, but this mission would be more about following precise procedures than demonstrating advanced flying skills." General Chun nodded slowly. "Major, if I approve this mission, would you be willing to fly it with Specialist Santos as your co-pilot?" "Yes, sir, but I want to be clear about the risks. We'll be operating with minimal weather margins, challenging runway conditions, and unknown variables on the ground. Success will depend on precise timing, flawless execution, and some amount of luck." "Understood," General Chun said. "How much time do you need to prepare?" Torres looked at her watch. 3 hours for flight planning, aircraft preparation, and crew briefing. That would put our departure at approximately the right time to hit the weather window Specialist Santos identified. The general looked around the room one more time, his gaze settling on Maria. "Specialist Santos, this is your last chance to reconsider. If you're wrong about the weather timing, if the conditions are worse than predicted, if anything goes wrong during this mission, you and Major Torres could die along with everyone you're trying to save." Maria felt the weight of 200 lives pressing down on her, along with the scrutiny of senior officers who were judging not just her flying abilities, but her character and judgment. Everything she had worked for during her time at Falcon Ridge had led to this moment, this test of whether her analytical skills and determination could translate into real-world performance when everything was at stake. "I understand the risks. Sir, I believe we can make this work." General Chun was quiet for nearly 30 seconds, and Maria could see him running through calculations and contingencies that would influence not just this mission, but potentially his own career and the lives of everyone involved. "Mission approved," he said finally. "Major Torres, you have 3 hours to prepare. Specialist Santos, this is your chance to prove that desk jockeys can fly when it matters." The briefing room exploded into activity as officers began coordinating the dozens of details required to launch a rescue mission into hurricane conditions. Maria found herself at the center of the preparation, working with Major Torres to refine the flight plan and coordinate with ground support teams while simultaneously running final checks on her weather analysis. Jake Harrison approached her as she was updating meteorological calculations on her laptop computer. "Santos, I've got to hand it to you. I never thought you had this kind of courage." "Thanks," Maria said, not looking up from her work. "But I hope you understand what you're getting yourself into. This isn't a training flight where you can start over if something goes wrong. People are going to die if you screw this up." Maria finally looked at him, seeing something in his expression that might have been concern rather than his usual condescension. "I know exactly what I'm getting into, Jake. The question is whether you understand what it means to be responsible for other people's lives." As the preparation continued, Maria felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. For months, she had been trying to prove that she belonged in the cockpit of high-performance aircraft, fighting against perceptions that she was too analytical, too cautious, too different from the typical fighter-pilot stereotype. Now she was about to fly a mission where those very qualities might be exactly what was needed for success. 3 hours later, as she strapped herself into the co-pilot seat of the C-130 Hercules that would carry them into Hurricane Elena, Maria realized that everything in her career had been leading to this moment. The years of air traffic control, the months of flight training, the weeks in operations planning, and the skills she had developed in weather analysis and mission coordination were all about to be tested in the most challenging flying conditions she had ever imagined. Major Torres completed the pre-flight checklist with methodical precision, her voice calm and professional as she coordinated with ground control for their departure clearance. "Ready for this, Santos?" Maria looked out the cockpit window at the storm clouds building on the horizon, knowing that somewhere beneath that violent weather system 200 people were waiting for rescue that might never come. "Ready, ma'am. Let's go get them." The C-130's engines spooled up with a deep, reassuring rumble, and they began their taxi to the runway. In 30 minutes, they would either be heroes or casualties, but for the first time since arriving at Falcon Ridge, Maria felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The storm's outer bands hit them at 8,000 feet, transforming the smooth flight from Falcon Ridge into a bone-jarring battle against nature's fury. Maria gripped her seat restraints as the C-130 bucked and rolled through turbulence that felt like being inside a washing machine filled with concrete blocks. Through the windscreen, she could see nothing but gray-black clouds illuminated by occasional flashes of lightning that revealed the awesome scope of Hurricane Elena's destructive power. "Winds are gusting to 70 knots now," Major Torres announced through the intercom, her voice steady despite the aircraft's violent motion. "We're still 40 minutes out from San Miguel Island, but we're already seeing the edge of what this aircraft can handle." Maria focused on her instruments, tracking their position relative to the eye wall and monitoring the weather data streaming into their navigation system. Her analysis had predicted a brief window of improved conditions, but the actual storm was proving more chaotic and unpredictable than any computer model could capture. "Weather radar shows a break in the precipitation bands 15 miles ahead," she reported, studying the display that painted the storm's structure in shades of green, yellow, and ominous red. "Duration looks like it might be shorter than predicted. Maybe 20 minutes instead of 30. Torres nodded grimly. "Then we'll have to work faster once we get on the ground. How many people can we fit in the cargo compartment?" Maria had run those calculations during their flight planning session, but the numbers were sobering. Maximum configuration would be about 120 people, assuming minimal luggage and equipment. That means we'll need to make 2 trips, which isn't possible given the weather timeline. The mathematics of the situation were brutal and unforgiving. 200 people needed rescue, but their aircraft could only carry half that number safely. Someone would have to make an impossible choice about who got saved first, and Maria realized that choice would probably fall to her and Torres when they reached the island. "Island approach control. This is Rescue 7 requesting landing clearance," Torres transmitted as they descended through 6,000 feet towards San Miguel Island. The response came back weak and crackling with static. "Rescue 7, this is San Miguel Emergency Operations. Runway conditions are marginal with standing water and cross winds gusting to 40 knots. We strongly advise against landing attempt." Maria could see the island now through breaks in the storm clouds, a small patch of land that looked impossibly vulnerable against the massive waves already pounding its shores. The single runway appeared to be partially flooded, and she could see palm trees bent nearly horizontal by the wind. "San Miguel emergency. We're going to attempt landing during the next weather break," Torres replied. "Have all personnel ready for immediate evacuation. We'll have approximately 15 minutes on the ground." "Understood, Rescue 7, all." Civilians are assembled in the community center adjacent to the runway, standing by for evacuation. The next few minutes felt like hours as they circled the island, waiting for Maria's predicted break in the weather. She watched her instruments obsessively, looking for the atmospheric pressure changes and wind patterns that would signal the arrival of calmer conditions. "Pressure's rising," she announced as the aircraft buffeted through another wall of turbulence. "Wind speeds are starting to decrease. The break should begin in approximately 3 minutes." Torres lined up for their approach, fighting to keep the aircraft stable as crosswinds tried to push them away from the runway centerline. This is going to be interesting. The runway looks like it's about 50% underwater. Maria could see people gathered near the small terminal building, their figures bent against the wind as they waited desperately for rescue. The sight of those vulnerable human forms, against the overwhelming power of the storm, made the abstract numbers of their mission planning suddenly, terrifyingly real. "Weather break beginning now," she called out as the wind indicators on her instruments suddenly showed a significant decrease in velocity. "We've got maybe 18 minutes before conditions deteriorate again." Torres committed to the landing, dropping the C-130 toward the flooded runway with a precision that spoke of years of experience in challenging conditions. The aircraft hit the water-covered asphalt with a tremendous splash, sending spray flying past the cockpit windows as the landing gear found purchase on the submerged pavement. "Engines reversing, full braking," Torres announced as she fought to stop the aircraft before reaching the end of the short runway. The C-130 slowed dramatically, throwing both pilots forward against their restraints as the airplane finally came to a stop with perhaps 100 feet of runway remaining. "Nice landing," Maria said, meaning it completely. "Thank the airplane." "And about 10 years of luck," Torres replied as she began shutting down systems to prepare for a rapid ground turnaround. "Now let's see how many people we can get out of here." The cargo door dropped open to reveal a scene that looked like something from an apocalyptic movie. Wind-driven rain lashed the tarmac while palm fronds and debris flew through the air like missiles. The civilians who had been waiting in the terminal building began running toward the aircraft, their desperation obvious despite the dangerous conditions. Maria had expected chaos, but what she witnessed was the opposite. The island's residents moved with organized efficiency, helping elderly community members and carrying children, while larger groups formed human chains to move people quickly toward the aircraft. Someone had clearly prepared them for this moment, and their discipline in the face of terror was both humbling and inspiring. "We need to load by weight and size," Maria called to Torres over the sound of wind and engines. "Children and smaller adults first, then fill remaining space with larger passengers." The loading process became a desperate race against time and weather. Maria found herself standing in the cargo door, helping pull people into the aircraft, while mentally calculating weight and balance as each new passenger came aboard. Every minute brought them closer to the point where weather conditions would make takeoff impossible. 60 people loaded, she called to Torres after 10 minutes of frantic activity. "We're approaching maximum weight for these runway conditions." Torres appeared at her shoulder, studying the mass of frightened civilians filling their cargo compartment and the equally large crowd still waiting outside. "We can take 20 more, maybe 25 if we're willing to accept some risk on takeoff performance." Maria looked out at the people still waiting and felt her heart break. Families stood together, some parents already making the agonizing decision about which family members would go on the first aircraft and which would remain behind. An elderly man was pushing his wife toward the airplane while shaking his head. When she tried to pull him along with her, "We can't leave them," Maria said, though she knew the mathematics of aircraft performance as well as anyone. "There has to be something we can do. Weather conditions are already starting to deteriorate," Torres pointed out, indicating the wind instruments that showed increasing gusts. "If we don't take off in the next 8 minutes, we might not be able to get out at all." Maria stared at the crowd of people still waiting for rescue, her mind racing through possibilities and options that all seemed to lead to the same heartbreaking conclusion. Then she remembered something from her operations planning work, a technique for optimizing aircraft loading that might give them additional capacity. "What if we reconfigure the seating?" she asked Torres urgently. "Instead of having people sit in the standard positions, we put smaller passengers in spaces that wouldn't normally be occupied. Kids on laps, people sitting on the floor in designated Area's maximum utilization of every cubic foot of space. Torres looked skeptical. That's not exactly standard procedure for passenger operations. This isn't a standard passenger operation, Maria pointed out. This is a life-or-death emergency evacuation, and we're the only aircraft that's going to make it here before the island is underwater. Torres studied the remaining crowd of civilians and seemed to come to the same conclusion Maria had reached. You think we can fit everyone? I think we have to try. The reconfiguration took precious minutes they didn't have, but the island residents again showed remarkable cooperation as Maria and Torres explained the new seating arrangement. Children sat on parents' laps, smaller adults shared seats, and people arranged themselves in every available space that could safely accommodate a human being during takeoff and flight. 196 people on board, Maria announced as the last civilian squeezed into the aircraft. 4 people unaccounted for. Airport maintenance crew, called a voice from outside the aircraft. They're securing equipment and will be here in 2 minutes. Those 2 minutes felt like 2 hours as Maria watched the weather instruments show continuing deterioration in conditions. Winds were gusting back toward dangerous levels, and the runway was accumulating more standing water as rain intensity increased. The maintenance crew arrived at a dead run, diving into the aircraft just as Torres began spooling up the engines for takeoff. 200 people on board, Maria called over the intercom. Cargo door secured, ready for departure. Torres advanced the throttles without hesitation, knowing that any delay might make takeoff impossible. The overloaded C-130 began its roll down the flooded runway, spray flying from the landing gear. As they accelerated through standing water that was deeper than Maria had expected. Airspeed alive, Torres called as they passed 60 knots. Rotate speed in 10 knots. Maria watched the airspeed indicator climb with agonizing slowness. The aircraft's performance degraded by the extra weight and difficult runway conditions. They needed to reach rotation speed before running out of runway, but the physics of heavy aircraft and short runways were working against them. VR, Torres called, pulling back on the controls to lift the nose wheel off the waterlogged pavement. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the aircraft balanced on the edge between flight and disaster, the main landing gear still in contact with the runway while Torres coaxed every bit of performance from the struggling airplane. Then they were airborne, climbing slowly but steadily away from San Miguel Island and the hurricane that was about to erase it from the map. Through the cargo windows, Maria could see waves already washing over the lower portions of the runway. They had just departed, and she realized they had escaped with perhaps minutes to spare. Outstanding work, Santos, Torres said as they leveled off at 3,000 feet and turned toward the mainland. Your weather analysis was exactly right, and your loading calculations probably saved 50 lives. Maria looked back at the cargo compartment filled with 200 people who had been facing certain death an hour earlier. Children were crying, adults were holding each other, and everyone was soaking wet and exhausted. But they were alive. The desk jockey who couldn't keep up with the natural pilots had just executed the most challenging and meaningful flight of her life. The landing at Corpus Christi Naval Air Station was almost anticlimactic after their dramatic departure from San Miguel Island. Emergency crews were waiting to help with the evacuation of passengers, and news crews had gathered to document the rescue mission that had saved 200 lives in the face of impossible conditions. General Chun was waiting at the aircraft. When they shut down the engines, and Maria could see a crowd of people from Falcon Ridge who had flown in to witness the arrival of the rescue aircraft. Jake Harrison was among them, and for the first time since she had met him, his expression showed genuine respect rather than casual dismissal. Specialist Santos, General Chun said as she climbed down from the cockpit. That was exceptional flying under impossible conditions. You and Major Torres have just demonstrated the finest traditions of Air Force aviation. Maria felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had accomplished, but she also felt a deep sense of completion. For the first time since arriving at Falcon Ridge, she had proven to herself and everyone else that her analytical approach to flying and her meticulous attention to detail weren't weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths that could save lives when it mattered most. "Sir, I couldn't have done this without the team," she said, indicating Torres and the ground crews who had supported their mission. This was about everyone working together to solve an impossible problem. That's exactly the kind of leadership thinking we need from our pilots, General Chun replied. "Colonel Hayes tells me you've been working on adaptive mission planning concepts that could revolutionize how we conduct operations under uncertain conditions." The conversation that followed changed the trajectory of Maria's career in ways she could never have imagined. Instead of being seen as a marginal pilot candidate who might eventually qualify for basic transport duties, she was suddenly recognized as someone who brought unique analytical capabilities to complex aviation challenges. Within 6 months, she had completed pilot training with distinction, earned her wings, and been selected for specialized training in search and rescue operations. Her work on adaptive mission planning became the foundation for new Air Force doctrine on emergency response operations, and she found herself briefing senior officers at the Pentagon on techniques she had developed during her time as a supposedly failed pilot candidate. But the most satisfying moment came during the graduation ceremony for her pilot training class. As she stood with her classmates, finally wearing the silver wings that represented years of dreams and determination, Maria realized that the journey had taught her something more valuable than flying skills. She had learned that being different wasn't a weakness to be hidden, but a strength to be leveraged. Her analytical approach to problems, her attention to detail, and her willingness to question established procedures had made her a better pilot than she could have become by simply trying to fit the traditional mold. Jake Harrison approached her after the ceremony, wearing the wings of a newly qualified fighter pilot. "Santos, I owe you an apology for the way I treated you during training. I completely misunderstood what makes someone a good pilot." "Thanks, Jake. I think we all learned something during this process." "What's your assignment?" "Search and rescue operations at Moody Air Force Base," Maria said with a smile. Turns out the Air Force needs pilots who can think through complex problems and fly when conditions are less than perfect. As she walked away from the ceremony, Maria thought about the 200 people who were alive because she had refused to accept that desk jockeys couldn't be pilots. The storm that had threatened to destroy San Miguel Island had instead revealed that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the person everyone needs. The desk was behind her now, and the sky stretched ahead with endless possibilities. She had earned her place among the clouds, not by becoming someone else, but by proving that being herself was exactly enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.